Thank you, Deborah. That was a lovely presentation. You really summarized it nicely. Now we have the good fortune to have two people who can help comment on this, both on the report itself, but then on its implications for policy and programming. And so I'll introduce them both now, and then I think Krista will come up, and then Mark. So our first commentator is going to be Krista Jacobs. She works in the USAID, and she's heavily involved in Feed the Future on a number of fronts, including gender, including evaluation. And so I think she can give us a broad idea about kind of how this fits with overall design, with evaluation, with strategy, etc. So that I think that'll be great. And then we have Mark Blackenden. And Mark has a long history. He's got gray hair like me. And but Mark's worked a lot in the area of gender development for a long time, including contributing to some very influential publications on this, including one that which he co-edited on gender, time use, and poverty in sub-Saharan Africa. So I think we're very fortunate to have two people who can give comments to the team both on the report, but then on the implications as well, which was the closing part of the presentation. So Krista, let's start with you, please. And you have a presentation. I'll leave that to you.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to IFPRI for inviting me, and thank you to Deborah and your team for putting together this great review and presentation. I'm going to speak, am I close enough to the mic? I'll first talk a little bit about Feed the Future and how this agriculture time nutrition linkage fits in with our work, and then move to comments on and ideas from the paper. So this ag time nutrition link is something that's really been at the heart of Feed the Future from the beginning, even though we don't necessarily in our evaluations follow that pathway all the way through. And the focus on the link was really driven a lot by our country missions who are still concerned about this. And it's resulted in, or it's really motivated our work in agricultural technology. What interventions, what technologies can we make that are labor reducing, especially for women, so that there is more time available for care and child nutrition, but also hopefully increasing incomes as well. Something else that we are more deliberately doing recently is engaging men in care and nutrition behaviors, partially to shift some of that workload of running a household and raising children to men, but also so they can be supportive of the decisions and activities women need to do for their own health and nutrition as well as for children's. The Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index that many of IFPRI personnel and others were involved in developing and implementing does collect time use allocation for women and for men. We have it in 19 of the Feed the Future countries for 2012. We have another round coming in 2015. I encourage everyone to use that data. Please use it, improve upon the methodology as well. There. So comments on the review. First, I'm just always glad to see even more and more visibility of showing, yes, women are in agriculture, here's what they're doing. But also, we've been doing a lot of work in the past decade or so that programs understand and interventions understand women are in agriculture. You need to be seeing them as your clientele. You need to be seeing them as your participants. So I think this highlights that as well. I really liked the coping mechanism organization, that last figure you showed. But of course, as all good research does, it raises some questions. What do we know about the relative prevalences of those coping mechanisms? How are people combining them? And are there patterns in who is using which? Are there things that men are using? Are there things that younger women or women with smaller children are using? What can we tell about those smaller households that have less available labor for care, for agriculture as well? And then for the policy responses that you have put forth, what evidence do we have on which of those seem to be more effective or not? Something that is, growing increasingly clear in your research as well is we need to stop thinking about, or stop limiting our thinking in agriculture to agricultural production and bring in more of processing, marketing, trading. And so I thought the review really, the recommendations really pointed out that these are areas we need to be looking into more. Can our interventions and our programming be addressing processing, cooking? And when I say processing, I'm not advocating that everyone in the developing world should be eating Lunchables in their villages, but more ground nut paste, processing that soy flour. And so I think that has an implication for the data we collect. Do we need to be breaking down agricultural time use into more specific tasks and categories of tasks to understand how people are moving their time around within agriculture? And similarly, not only in agriculture, what can we be doing in the data we collect and in our programming on household chores and responsibilities? These are the things that are needed, that need to happen in order to make a household run. The firewood, the water, the cleaning, the going to market. And these are things that do fall primarily on women in many countries. But these are things that, as we do programming to better use that ag time nutrition pathway, can we be coupling programs and interventions that try to reduce time use in these categories as well? That's mostly that. I do want to highlight one thing here, and that is whose time are we looking at? Are we looking at men, smaller households, different kinds of women and men? And I think some of the data we have can start to get to that. One thing that wasn't clear to me in the review is how much of the gaps that you found are from, lower quality evidence, and how much is from it simply hasn't been analyzed yet. So I think that's something that would be good to clarify. And then I think this review is a great step on the way to setting concise and clear, perhaps not standards, but needs. What do we need from time use data? And first is understanding what it is that we're trying to learn from it, and what parts of that pathway do we need to better see. Do we need to be understanding more just what are general patterns of time allocation for different kinds of people? And or are we looking to understand, if I put an agricultural intervention here, how do people change their time? Because that requires different methodologies and different kinds of data. One recommendation that I would have is to take the great figure you have of the pathway and just note where is there inadequacy in data and where is the inadequacy in analysis. So where's that pathway evidentially broken and where is it working well? One question that I do have, I ask, may become my mission in life, is what can we learn and do with the data we already have? So the review pointed out that much of this data is of low quality, but not all of it. And much is there that has not been analyzed. I know with the WIA data, and I suspect with many other data sets, we can start to get to some of these life cycle issues, some of these, what profiles and different kinds of people have different patterns of time use. I think there's a lot we can get to. So it would be good to systematically look at, well, what can we answer that has been raised that's unanswered? Then, is there a need to organize and prioritize, well, what are criteria for good time use data? We know it needs to be better. What are the most important things that will make it better? Method of collection, are we doing observation, are we doing survey? And that will depend on what it is we're trying to answer. This bullet point, the bullet point that starts with simultaneous activities is really just meant to point out that they raised a lot of characteristics that are needed for good time use data. When we get to the realities of doing fieldwork, of budgeting, what are the ones we really need to focus on to know we have data we can use? So a very quick plug for the Women's Empowerment Index is available. Here are some places you can find it. Please use it. I think it can get to some of these socioeconomic issues. And then for some further thinking, one of the big findings, agricultural interventions tend to increase women's, men, and children's time burdens. We're doing all of this work to get technologies out, to improve agricultural practices, and we're seeing people taking them up and working more because, well, now they can. They're getting more out of it, their time is more valuable, and they feel they need to, they're choosing to. Is there a tipping point at which they will start to divert some of that time to care and nutrition, to divert some of that time to leisure and rest? That's a question I don't know the answer to, and I don't know that our current tools and methodologies would be able to pick that up. And part of that is we're not looking at specific tasks or kinds of tasks within agriculture, within work, within care and nutrition. And then from a programming perspective, what can we do to combine our agricultural programs and our nutrition programs? What can we combine to try to mitigate some of these coping mechanisms? So we know that these interventions are going to increase people's workloads. What can we add, possibly from some of the policy responses that they propose, that will prevent some of the potentially harmful effects? Thank you.